Hello, PsychU community. Welcome to today's follow-up question and answer session from our May Mental Health Education Roundtable, a discussion amongst a parent, advocate, and educator. I am Bryan Archuleta from the Otsuka Field Medical Affairs team, and I would like to welcome back Michael Townsend from Gateway Counseling, Amy Molloy from the Mental Health Association of New York State, and Jessica Hall from Coda Middle School in New York. Thank you all for joining us again today. I'm going to jump to our first question, and I think I'll start with you, Amy, but Michael and Jess, feel free to jump in as well. First question is, can you comment on how evidence-based best practice studies were utilized in the development of the New York State program? And are there any other resources in this regard which you would recommend for our audience?
New York State, there is not any specific program that's required for mental health education. Schools are able to identify what they think works best for them. But when we advocated for the law, we were really thinking heavily about some research, and that's really where the evidence-based best practices come in. And the research was around mental health literacy, as well as social emotional learning. So mental health literacy essentially says that if we can teach people, all people, young people and adults, how to improve their mental health, and we can teach them sort of early signs and symptoms so that they can recognize when they're experiencing problems, when we can teach them about treatment options, then they typically get help sooner. And they can also act as a supporter for others in the community, their peers, their family members. You can really have some significant changes to attitudes and beliefs about mental health. People are able to get help sooner, and so then they have better health outcomes. And that's for the mental health literacy research. And then for social emotional learning, we know that the social emotional learning skills help improve students' attitudes about themselves and others and about their school. It improves positive classroom behavior. It improves academics. There's fewer conduct problems, less emotional stress, and in fact, lower drug use. And so this is all documented research in both mental health and social emotional learning, and that's really where it came from. Probably one of the best resources, at least from social emotional learning perspective, is CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, produces some guides. There's one for elementary and one for secondary, and they look at some of the social emotional learning programs that are out there, and they provide a measurement of how they rate in terms of evidence-based for different categories of outcomes. And their website is CASEL, CASEL.org, and the guide can be found at casel.org/guide.
Yeah, I think that Amy's making a really great point. And as it translates to the classroom throughout New York State, the guidelines are all set in place, but then any individual school or teacher can utilize what they feel they need. And so some of these programs that exist out there that are CAN programs that are also research-based, if a school's not doing much, they could start with something like that, which kind of has like an A to Z coverage of sorts. But I actually had a colleague just the other day who was shifted to a new position and called me and said, listen, I have to teach mental health at the high school level. I haven't done it in a long time. I know you worked with the mental health committee. Where can you send me? And right away I said, you need to go to the school mental health website through Mahaney's, because they have lessons that were created that literally, if you're like, I don't know where to begin, you can pick them up and start with those. And they were created based off of the SEL guidelines and the new mental health guidelines. So I think for someone who's starting from scratch, it's a really good place to go. If there are teachers that are already teaching, then we look to those guidelines to figure out where the gaps may be. But in general, like Amy said, they were created based on best practices, based on research. And so it would be crazy to start anywhere else.
And to kind of carry it towards the end of it, I guess, in regards to parents and the individual students, is that even the entry point within the website has it for educators, it has for students, it has for families. So everyone can get their own perspective and collaborate effectively. Because one of the things Amy had mentioned, which I think is real important, is kind of, to a less extent, indoctrinating the students with mental health, with some of the concepts. Because they, as a peer support, I mentioned it in the last webinar, I guess, they're much more likely to listen to their friends, unfortunately, than their parents. It's just the nature of it. So the more we educate them, they can support each other, because it can normalize some of the transitional aspect of going from childhood, developmental stages, some of the validations of what you're thinking and what you're feeling. It makes it a lot easier for them to be receptive towards expressing what they're going through.
Can you please comment on the role of certified mental health professionals in the program? And how are mental health professionals utilized from the perspective of administrators, teachers, and students?
Well, I can certainly speak to that one. We teach mental health in the classroom for sure, but we also let students know that we are somewhat of a first line of defense if they're having an issue, if they have a friend who's having an issue, or just a peer that they've heard through the grapevine is having an issue. And so students generally, we've set up a rapport where they feel very comfortable coming to us with those concerns, and then we essentially bring them right to the school counselor, which in my district, which is large, we're lucky enough to have, a plethora of school counselors for the students for a lot of the day-to-day stuff. If a student is determined to have an issue that goes beyond that, we also have school psychologists, we have social workers, we even have a whole wellness center set up for the high school students, which I let my 8th graders know that will be, coming down the line available to you. But I think the educators, we see ourselves as kind of the first stop.
The teachers are equally important. So whatever mental health professionals within a school can do to support the efforts of teachers, whether it's through some education or just through, their own kind of emotional support and debriefing of situations, staff wellness matters. And when you have a mental health professional team in a school that can support the wellness of all staff, that's going to support the health of students as well.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in to kind of bridge the gap between a mental health professional and a parent, which happen to be both, right? And when I looked at the idea of reducing the kind of stigma, the taboo of seeing a therapist or a counselor or someone within the system, if I was in school that had a stomach ache, I probably wouldn't have an issue going to the nurse. But I don't want to, we're also trying to have it as a normalizing aspect. So the parents would be more than happy to have their kid go and see, let's say, the school counselor, the school psychologist, where it isn't overtly pathologizing. It's just a normal support. Well, the same way if my child normally has to get their teeth cleaned, they go to the dentist. If they normally have to get these supports that are available, the mental health professional within the school should be just another resource, another support that's available for parents and for the students.
And now for our last question. Can you please discuss how the role of trauma as it relates to mental health is addressed in this population, and considering the potential traumatic effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, how do you see the transition back in the fall from a mental health perspective?
That's a tough question. It's going to be tricky for the adults, I think, to reacclimate to what it feels like to be back in school and what our lives will look like, given what the new normal might bring, which we're not even entirely sure of just yet. And anytime the adults are learning while the students are learning, that's a challenge. I almost feel like it's akin to technology, actually, which is what I teach my students. We're learning how technology works and what the rules and regulations are, while you are as well. And it's an uncomfortable place to be because usually the adults are the experts. And so when we're in a situation where we are learning alongside the kids, it's almost like building the plane while it's in the air. It's tough because they think that they can look to us as the experts, and we're not yet experts on this because no one is. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. But at the same time, I think if I'm trying to be optimistic about it, it will also allow us to feel that we've shared in this together and that we are kind of experiencing a collective trauma that brings us together and unites us in a way, which on some level down the line will also, I think, give the kids a better understanding of trauma for those students who haven't had many past traumas in their life. This will now add one. And so when the conversation comes up about what it means to go through a trauma and how there are stages to it and how we process it and how it may stick with us, I think it will bring a new level of understanding from the mental health perspective. That one is going to take some time. There's going to be levels to this, but I think, as an optimist, I see down the line, this could be a great learning experience so that our students can build some resilience by having gone through it. So those are just my first few thoughts on the matter.
I guess, jumping on where Jessica mentioned the concept of resilience, right? It is very important because even physiologically, if you start exercising, maybe you walk a block, then you walk 2 blocks and a half a mile. Or if I'm lifting weights, I go from 5 pounds to 10 pounds. Eventually, I build up kind of a strength or the resources to go further. Part of it is when we talk about the idea of trauma, just for students, and it's for us in society. The interesting part, I was talking to a nurse yesterday, we're talking about the COVID babies. how are they going to be able to read facial affect when the parents are talking to them like this, et cetera? They're not going to be able to read the kind of emotions that children or babies would normally be able to see. So that's going to be interesting in the long term. But the increase of maybe anxiety, depression, isolation, some of that is there. But hopefully, like Jessica mentioned, in terms of being able to have more aspect to see your children, be around them, have that kind of maybe nuclear family a little bit more involved. It has been very, very difficult, I imagine, for grandparents, for children not to be able to see some of their friends. There's also been a huge increase in regards to potentially domestic violence for people who have not been had the opportunity to leave their home. But even the normalizing activities, going for a walk, getting a haircut, right? All these things that we wouldn't think about before, now they have to be planned. We have to think about how we're going to do it. And that's going to be an interesting kind of learning curve for all of us. So in regards to trauma, I mean, trauma does build resilience. It does make people stronger in the long run. It's just difficult in the short term. Hopefully we can kind of see it out what the benefit will be in the future.
Yeah, Jess and Michael make really, really good points. I do think that I'm going to jump on that hopefulness that's just shared and say that I think there is like some wonderful learning that can happen here collectively, and maybe an opportunity for, perspective taking and empathy, and a really great place to develop some of those social emotional learning skills. But I also think that we have to go into the fall really being clear on what the concerns could potentially be. I think that we're going to see more kids with some trauma experience, with a varying trauma experience, and whether that is grief and loss, or whether it's just the anxiety and the uncertainty of safety. And we are just going to have to be very cognizant of that as we move through the next couple months. I think being prepared will be helpful, but I also think that there's going to be some things that we're not sure about that we maybe haven't thought about yet. I was on a call with a group of educators not too long ago, and the question was, what happens if we go back to school and then this happens again, and now students are back home remote learning? And the sort of discussion being, if we tell them that they're safe and everything's going to be okay, that we put all these things into place, and then this happens again, like what kind of message are we sending? So we have to be very cognizant about our language that we're using with them right now, about doing everything that we can to stay safe right now, and that there are still some things that we may not anticipate. We're just going to have to be really careful about that. And I think it also starts with knowing our population and what their experiences are. So perhaps the summer is a great opportunity for schools to do some surveys of families, find out what kind of experiences they've had, so that they have a better understanding of what students are coming to the fall with, whether that's remote or in person. And then again, going back to the staff, we have to make sure we give them a chance to really debrief what's happening for them. I think things move so quickly in the last couple months that I'm not sure we've really had a lot of opportunity to process this. We've all done the best we can to get through. But the thing about trauma is that storytelling can be very healing. And having the opportunity to kind of process what we've experienced is important, but have we had the chance to do that? And will we have the chance to do that? We're going to have to be very purposeful in how we look at this moving through the summer.
The other thing is that I was really in my head was focusing a lot of attention on infection and COVID and the pandemic as we're living through it. But I was also thinking over the last month or two, also just a general sense of social unrest also. Yeah. So that's also another sense of trauma, because they're watching television and hearing protests, and they're watching people march in the streets, and different social norms and values are being kind of, your authority figures or the people who are supposed to protect you, potentially police, maybe they're being vilified or maybe they're being challenged. And then how people who look like me or young kids are being put in different situations. That's just on top of the potential risk of infection from COVID. That's another wave of potential trauma. And hopefully when we talk about mental education, it's not just strictly focusing on the physiological, obviously, it's about psychological. It's about what they see and what they feel and how to express it. And adolescents and teenagers are hard because you're not a full advocate for your voice yet, but hopefully they'll be in a position to kind of understand what they're feeling and how to express it. So it's a very interesting time we're living in.
Yeah, and I think to Amy's point, using the summer to really prepare ourselves, because no one is kidding ourselves into thinking that we'll be going into the fall fully prepared. But if we can do some digging and figure out what has gone on in families and really prepare ourselves for what types of issues the kids might want to discuss and might feel relevant when they come back, then I think, on that level, we'll feel prepared. But then beyond that, even throughout this whole distance learning experience, when I've taught myself or I've listened to my own children's teachers through the computers, I think the theme, and this goes back to something that Amy said earlier, is that educators, we don't have to pretend that we have all the answers. And I think it's important to be real with the kids in a sense that we hope that we'll be able to stay in school. We don't know what might happen. Be authentic, be your real self. That's the best practice from teaching 101. But then show the kids that no matter what happens, I love you. I'm here for you. We will get through this together. I'll be available to you in any way I can be. That was what I heard through the computer screens coming at my kids. And that's what they wanted to hear from their teachers, because, you can't necessarily create the safe space from the germs, and you can't create the safe space from whatever's going on with the social unrest, but you can create the I'm still here for you, as your teacher in any way that I can be. And then on some level that can't be taken away from them, and so I think that's comforting. So yes, we need to get the nuts and bolts in order as far as the logistics, but just remembering that being there for the kids is one of the most important things that we can do come the fall, whatever the fall looks like, I think is important.
We as administrators, support staff need to be there for the teachers so they can be there for the kids.
Definitely.
In regards to like what's going to be the new normal and resilience and what the fall will bring, I just had a thought as an adult, right? One of the things that we all lived through was 9/11, right? And afterwards, a lot of the changes that took place, be it taking your shoes off when you go to the airport, or being able to have everything checked, or now in schools, a lot of times have metal detectors. Sometimes things do change, and we do, accommodate. We do acclimate ourselves to changes in society. Whether or not we would have saw it beforehand, you can't predict the future, obviously. But the idea that things will be different, yeah, things will be different. The same way when we talk to students about developmentally, maybe at one point you used to wear a diaper, now you don't, right? Maybe before you couldn't cross the street on your own, but now you can. You continue to grow and develop, and that's kind of the learning curve within life, right? That's what kind of makes it interesting, right? That there are new things to challenge, new things to kind of rise to the occasion to. And that's, if you can take that positive thinking that we are resilient and we'll get through it, that's an important thing to kind of resonate in families, in schools, et cetera.
Wow, thank you guys so much. That was a great, excellent discussion. That was the final question that we had, but I think you guys really brought up some interesting points, including some of the social unrest that's happened since our previous recording that are going to affect what we already have going on with the pandemic. So I really appreciate you sharing some insight, and I really think you're going to touch a lot of points here that our audience is going to really find helpful, both professional level and a personal level, based on these interesting times that you discussed. So I'd like to thank you again, Michael, Amy, and Jess, for taking the time to reconvene with us today and answer these questions. As a reminder, the Mental Health Education Roundtable is available on PsychU if you would like to log on there and view the original webinar. So thanks again. We want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we hope you have a great day.